Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Modern Open in Richmond, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard. I'm Nick Miller alongside SCG Tour leader and top eights and all the good things.
All the good things.
Todd Anderson.
Some of the good things.
How you doing?
Hi, Nick. How you doing this morning, man?
Pretty good. Good to see you back on the tour here. Take a little break.
Thank you.
Come back, and we're playing Vengevine.
Yeah, so I've been trying to find a deck that I really like over the last couple weeks in preparation for this tournament, and nothing really caught my eye until last week when, what's his name?
Julian Grace Martin.
Julian Grace Martin came to the tournament with Vengevine and Hollow One, and I was like, that sounds like a good idea.
And you've probably had some experience with Vengevine. You've been playing for a while.
Yeah, so my very first Vengevine deck was actually a fair Vengevine deck when it was in Standard, where I would cast it, and then when my opponents would Lightning Bolt it, I would follow it up with like a Noble Hierarch and a Birds of Paradise, and then bring it back and start attacking for 4 again. I also had Eldrazi Monument in that deck. It was a sweet deck.
This is a pretty sweet deck too, because unlike what Julian was doing last week with the super explosive, try to just turbo out Vengevine, turbo out, kill you with Become Immense, that kind of stuff. You're playing a more mid-range take, very similar to what the very aggressive Death Shadow decks used to do before they turned into the current iteration.
Right.
You've taken that mold and applied it to the Hollow One Vengevine shell.
Yeah, so this is like a weird hybrid of the Vengevine deck and a normal Death Shadow deck. Instead of just having a ton of stuff like Snapcaster Mage, Serum Vision, Thought Scour, we're a lot more aggressive. We're using the discard cards like Cathartic Reunion and Faithless Looting to basically power up Hollow One so that we can also get Vengevine into play quickly. And so we're a lot more aggressive than a normal Death Shadow deck, but we have a lot of the same elements. We're still able to play 4 copies of Thoughtseize, 4 copies of Fatal Push, and even 2 Liliana the Veil. Liliana the Veil actually pretty good with Hollow One also, with the tick up.
To discard it.
Yeah.
That's like it was a combo built right into the card.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a great card. This version is shying away from the Become Immense. It is shying away from Temur Battle Rage in favor of this better mid-game, better late game. I noticed that Connor, you said Connor? Is his name? Julian, okay. I'm really sorry. Julian looked like he was having a lot of problems with his 1-drop creatures, since in this deck, you don't really want to cast your 1-drop creatures on turn 1 too often, because you want to be able to trigger Vengevine on like turn 2 or 3. I noticed that his 1-drops weren't very good. And so what I decided to do was try to find the best 1-drops that I could play, and in effect, those became Death Shadow and Gurmag Angler. Right.
One thing we saw, he would often have to hold his 1-drops, especially his hasty creatures, to try to get these Vengevines to come back, which kind of hurt his aggressive strategy. So now we're in this mid-range build. You still have Insolent Neonate, you still have Hollow One, you still have Vengevine and a Delve threat instead of Hooting Mandrills. You've got Gurmag Anglers, but now you also have Death Shadow comboing with all the stuff you want to be doing anyway. So you get to interact with your opponents in the first couple turns and then set up these big turns.
Right, and the deck doesn't normally combo out in this version on turn 2. We're more of a turn 3 deck, and you're going to see this deck play out a lot like Death Shadow, in that you play a couple interactive things on the first few turns, and then once you establish a clear board, or your opponent's hand has been hit with Thoughtseize, you're able to find that one turn where you get to have the Cathartic Reunion plus Hollow One plus Neonate, get back some Vengevines. Or you get to go Death Shadow, Gurmag Angler, get back some Vengevines. And even if you're not getting back Vengevine, that's still a pretty good turn.
Yeah, you can't argue with what you're doing when you're putting Death Shadows into play, as we've seen with all these other iterations of the deck.
Yeah.
Just getting Death Shadow onto the field is usually good enough, especially with the disruption and things you have here. So we've gone away from the combo kill for this mid-range, which gives us a lot more options in the sideboard, because now we get to play these controlling strategies in the mid-game. I think the biggest boon to the Black-Red build is Collective Brutality here.
Oh, for sure. Collective Brutality, not only does it combo really well with Hollow One, it's one of the better sideboard cards in Modern against Burn, but also just has applications in a number of other matchups. And the fact that you get to play black and you get to play this card was a huge selling point for me personally.
And we're also not all in on the graveyard as his previous decks, where you get to do more mid-range things.
Yeah, I mean,
the game
obviously stuff like Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, is going to be good against most variants of Death Shadow, because they're either playing Snapcaster Mage or Tarmogoyf. This version, instead of those, we're playing Vengevine and Gurmag Angler. So it is going to be tough, but like the Death Shadow decks, we can still just Thoughtseize, play Death Shadow, Fatal Push your creature, and now play Liliana the Veil. And like, I still have this half of my deck that doesn't rely on my graveyard. And you might not know this, but you can just cast Vengevine and still 4/3 haste for 4 mana.
Yeah, that is something that is often overlooked.
Yeah.
We got 3 Nile Spellbomb here as your graveyard hate of choice.
Right. I originally had a 2-2 split of Nile Spellbomb and Surgical Extraction. I think Surgical is actually pretty good because you can find it off of either Faithful Fluting or Cathartic Reunion if you want to, and cast it that turn. I didn't bring Tormod's Crypt with me. I actually considered Tormod's Crypt. Fairy Macabre actually was a decent one I thought about too because it can make Hollow One a little bit cheaper, but I didn't feel like it was quite powerful enough and not quite synergistic enough to make it worth the addition.
Other multiple copies, we have Pyroclasm and Ancient Grudge. We're used to seeing these cards out of these decks.
Well, with Affinity definitely coming back in a big way over the last couple of months, I definitely think Ancient Grudge is a card that people should be looking to try to fit into their deck. I mean, I've splashed Ancient Grudge in my Grixis Splinter Twin deck before, so I know all about having the right hate cards for the metagame, for sure.
Now, my favorite, you get to bust out some big game hunters. 2 copies. We saw this back when Eldrazi was the big thing. People were trying to figure out any way to kill Thought Knot Seer, Reality Smasher, that kind of thing. You have it here, just opposing Death Shadows, I imagine?
So opposing Death Shadows and Gurmag Anglers. Fatal Push doesn't kill the big Delve creatures, obviously, so having a card that allows you to do that. Not only that, but Big Game Hunter off of Madness helps trigger Vengevine. It still counts as being discarded for Hollow One, so it has a lot of synergy in the deck. I'm very excited to cast Neonate, discard Big Game Hunter, and then get back Vengevine and kill your Thought Knot Seer and attack.
Get to live the dream. You can also find a way to get Hollow One into the mix somehow with the discard outlet. I want to see that. I want to see all 4, check boxes marked.
Oh, dude, I'm looking to Thoughtseize myself to take my Vengevine. We're using all the parts of the Buffalo to take a note out of Cedric Phillips' playbook from last week.
Also, we have Liliana, Last Hope, Colligan's Command, and Painful Truth as the last one of us rounding out the deck here.
Right, so games after sideboard are going to be a lot more grindy. Your opponents are going to have access to more removal. Cards like Painful Truth, Colligan's Command, Liliana, the Last Hope are just mid-range cards that don't really care about graveyard hate, and if your opponent's trying to play this longer game with you, with stuff like Path to Exile, you just want cards that can not only generate resources, but attack them from different angles. Painful Truth is normally not a card you see in Death Shadow decks, but since this one's a little more aggressive, I think Painful Truth is going to be a little bit better here, since we're going to be the aggressor in almost every single matchup, where most Death Shadow decks tend to be the control deck after sideboard in a lot of scenarios. Liliana Last Hope, just a phenomenal card in general, and then Colligan's Command is there because I wanted another Ancient Grudge type effect, but also a card I could bring in against like a control deck.
Right. Now, the last time you played Modern, I believe, was the Invitational, where you had a top 4 finish there, playing Grixis Shadow.
Yeah.
Now, in your article this week, you lamented not being able to play Teamer Box. What are your expectations with this deck this weekend?
Well, I think I'm making a Jund box, because this was sweet. I talked a little bit in my article this week about Jund, and for the last 2 years, really the only deck I've done well with in Modern was Jund. Even Death Shadow at the Invitational, my overall record was 6-4. I lost 3 times in the Swiss and once in the top 4, so it wasn't even that good for me, and I don't really like playing Death Shadow very much. So this version, I think, really puts it to the screws. So we'll see how it comes out there.
All right, our predictions are you're either going to win the tournament or have a real bad day.
Yeah,
so,
I actually predict I'm going to lose my first round, and then I'm going to figure out how my deck works, because I've played no games.
That's a shining endorsement here from Todd Anderson. Thanks for joining me here in the sideboard.
No problem.
Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Richmond.